My name is Evelyn. I'm 32 years old, and at this very moment, I am sitting at my family's dinner table, feeling the weight of their collective judgment pressed down on my shoulders like a physical thing. They think I'm broken, a failure, a cautionary tale whispered between sips of wine after I lost my job at a major tech company. Just moments ago, my father raised his glass to toast my younger brother, Mark, for a promotion he likely didn't earn, then turned to me with a condescending smile to preach about the importance of humility in the face of failure. They are publicly, artfully, mocking me. What they don't know, what they couldn't possibly conceive in their small, self-satisfied world is that in precisely 10 minutes, my assistant is going to walk through that front door. She will carry with her a piece of breaking news so seismic it will not just shatter their condescension, but obliterate the very foundation of the family hierarchy they hold so dear. If you've ever felt underestimated, belittled, or completely invisible to your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're viewing from. And make sure you hit that subscribe button to hear more true stories about reclaiming your worth when no one else believes in you. Before the world as I knew it imploded, my life was defined by two things: the elegant logic of code and the messy, unspoken contracts of family duty. As a senior software architect at Omnitech, one of the undisputed titans of the industry, my days were a blur of 14-hour marathons fueled by lukewarm coffee and the thrill of solving impossible problems. I lived and breathed complex algorithms, finding a serene beauty in the architecture of systems that powered the lives of millions. I wasn't just good at my job, I was exceptional. The AI-driven logistics platform my team and I had built from the ground up had become one of Omnitech's primary revenue streams, a jewel in their corporate crown. But within the walls of my childhood home, these achievements were treated like arcane trivia, abstract numbers that held no real-world value. To my family, I was simply Evelyn, the reliable older daughter, the stable one, the designated fixer of problems, both technical and financial. My success wasn't a source of pride for them, it was a utility. The injustice in my family wasn't a single traumatic event. It was the very atmosphere we all breathed, a low-grade toxin I had grown accustomed to. My younger brother, Mark, 2 years my junior, was the golden child. Where I was quiet and focused, Mark was charming and effusive. Where I earned respect through tangible results, he manufactured it with carefully crafted stories and a magnetic confidence that promised far more than it ever delivered. He knew how to say exactly what my parents wanted to hear, reflecting their own aspirations back at them. The difference in their treatment of us was a constant, glaring truth. When I received the letter confirming a full academic scholarship to Carnegie Mellon, one of the top engineering programs in the country, the reaction was a perfunctory nod from my father and a distracted, "Oh, that's nice, dear," from my mother, who was more concerned about the caterer for an upcoming party. Yet, when Mark was accepted into a mid-tier state university's business program a year later, it was cause for a lavish celebration. They rented out a local country club, invited distant relatives I hadn't seen in years, and my father gave a tearful speech about his son, the future captain of industry. When I quietly asked my mother why the response was so different, her answer carved a small, permanent wound in my heart. "Oh, Evelyn, boys just need more encouragement to build their confidence," she'd explained, patting my arm dismissively. "You've always been so self-sufficient. We never have to worry about you." That line became my curse. Because I was capable, my contributions were rendered invisible. Because I was strong, my sacrifices were treated as expectations. The deepest of those wounds was inflicted 3 years ago. My father, in a disastrous attempt to prove his investment acumen, had sunk the majority of their retirement savings into a revolutionary biotech startup. It turned out to be a sophisticated Ponzi scheme. They lost everything. I still remember the phone call, long after midnight. It wasn't my father who called. His pride wouldn't allow it. It was my mother, her voice a ragged whisper, choked with a terror I had never heard before. She told me the bank had started foreclosure proceedings on their home, the home I grew up in. Mark, when consulted, offered only empty platitudes about market volatility and vague promises to look into some options, which we all knew meant nothing. I didn't hesitate. The next morning, I walked into my bank and liquidated my entire investment portfolio, $50,000 I had meticulously saved and grown. The down payment for a small condo in the city that represented my own future, my own independence. I transferred the full amount to their account. "We'll pay you back, sweetie, every single penny, as soon as we're back on our feet," my father promised, his voice thick with a shame that I now realize was fleeting. That promise, of course, evaporated into the ether, never to be spoken of again. It became an unspoken taboo, a debt they chose to erase from their history, while the ghost of my forfeited condo haunted my dreams. And my support didn't stop there. When Mark decided he needed a BMW to project the right image for his nebulous consulting business, his credit was, unsurprisingly, a disaster. He came to me, not my parents, because he knew they had nothing left to give. He spun a tale of big deals on the horizon, of how this one status symbol was the only thing holding him back. I knew it was a lie, but the weight of family expectation was a crushing force. I co-signed the loan, shackling my pristine credit score to his recklessness. "You're a lifesaver, Ev," he'd said with a dazzling, hollow smile. "Once I land this big client, I'll make it up to you. Big time. I'm still waiting." This toxic dynamic had become so normalized that I barely registered the injustice anymore. It was a chronic ache I had learned to function with, a quiet hum of resentment beneath the surface of my dutiful exterior. I foolishly believed that my unwavering dedication, my silent sacrifices, would one day be seen and appreciated. I believed that if I ever truly needed them, they would finally step up for me. I thought my layoff would be that moment, the crisis that would finally awaken their empathy and support. Instead, it was the opening they'd been waiting for, the perfect opportunity to put me firmly in my place. I had always been the family's safety net. I just never realized that once the net was removed, they wouldn't try to catch me. They would just watch me fall. The storm broke on a gray, soul-crushingly ordinary Tuesday morning. The summons was delivered via a sterile calendar invite that appeared on my screen with an ominous chime. Mandatory meeting, strategic realignment. I walked into conference room 4B, a glass-walled box I'd spent countless hours in, to find my department head, Garrett, and a woman from Human Resources whose name I didn't know and whose smile didn't reach her eyes. The air in the room was thin and cold, stripped of all collegiality. They didn't offer me coffee. They didn't ask about my weekend. Garrett, a man with whom I'd shared project triumphs and late-night pizza, couldn't even meet my gaze. He let the HR woman do the talking. She spoke in a fluent, practiced corporatese, a language designed to anesthetize bad news. She used a symphony of buzzwords: synergistic optimization, resource reallocation, pivoting towards future-facing initiatives. It was all a convoluted, cowardly way of delivering a simple, brutal truth. The revolutionary AI project I had poured my heart and soul into for the past 2 years, the very platform that had been lauded in the last all-hands meeting as the future of the company, was being unceremoniously shelved. My position, they explained, was now redundant. I was one of 500 Omnitech employees being transitioned out of the organization that day. It wasn't a layoff, it was an erasure. The feeling wasn't a punch to the gut. It was the slow, silent vacuuming of air from my lungs. Everything I had built, my reputation, my security, my sense of purpose, had been rendered obsolete in a 15-minute meeting. I was escorted back to my desk by a security guard who watched impassively as I packed a decade of my life into a single, pathetic cardboard box. A framed photo from a team off-site, a coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Coder," a stress ball shaped like a brain. As I walked through the office, a place that had felt like a second home, I saw the averted eyes of my colleagues, their faces a mixture of pity and a desperate fear that they might be next. The silence was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I sat in my car in the vast, impersonal parking garage for what must have been an hour, staring at the box on the passenger seat. The initial, numbing shock slowly gave way to a cold, creeping dread that felt like ice water in my veins. But beneath the fear, another, more surprising emotion began to surface. A strange, almost illicit sense of relief. No more 10 p.m. emergency calls from the deployment team in Bangalore. No more canceled weekends to fix a critical bug. For the first time since I was 22 years old, my future was an unwritten page, both terrifying and thrilling in its emptiness. The first person I called, instinctively, was my mother. I craved the unconditional comfort that mothers in movies are supposed to provide. "Mom," I began, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "I have something to tell you. Omnitech." They laid me off. A beat of silence stretched across the line, a void that was not filled with sympathy, but with rapid, anxious calculation. "Oh my God, Evelyn," she finally said, her voice tight, strained. "Are you sure? I mean, how could they lay you off?" It wasn't a compliment, it was an interrogation. The subtext was clear. "What did you do wrong?" It was a massive, company-wide cut, Mom. It wasn't about my performance. "Well," she sighed, a sound heavy with her own inconvenience. "What on earth am I going to tell your Aunt Susan? I just finished telling her all about that big AI project you were leading." In that one sentence, she revealed her priority. It wasn't my emotional state or my financial future. It was her own social standing, her ability to boast about her successful daughter. The call ended quickly after that, padded with hollow assurances that everything would be fine and a distracted reminder for me not to forget about an upcoming family event. The call with Mark was even worse, a masterclass in feigned concern. "Ouch, sis," he'd said, his voice oozing a practiced, insincere sympathy. "The corporate world is a real meat grinder, huh? Look, you should see this as an opportunity to recalibrate. That whole tech scene is so volatile anyway. You need something with more longevity." His condescension was a physical thing, a slimy film coming through the phone. He, who had bounced between vague consulting gigs for years without ever producing a single verifiable result, was lecturing me on stability. 2 days later, my father called. Not to ask how I was coping, but to summon me to a special family dinner that Sunday. "We need to lift your spirits, get you out of the house," he said with a forced, booming cheerfulness. "And besides, we have some wonderful news to celebrate." My stomach tightened. "Good news?" "Yes. Mark just landed a massive promotion. He's now head of client strategy at his consulting firm. We're just bursting with pride." The blow was crueler than the layoff itself. They weren't just ignoring my pain, they were planning to use it as a dark backdrop to make Mark's manufactured success shine even brighter. They weren't having a dinner to comfort me. They were throwing a party for him, and my presence, the newly unemployed, failed daughter, was a required part of the spectacle. Every instinct screamed at me to say no, to protect what little dignity I had left. But decades of conditioning, the ingrained habit of placing their happiness above my own, took over. "Yes, Dad," I heard my own voice say, a traitor to my own well-being. "Of course. I'll be there." As I hung up the phone, the cold knot in my stomach solidified into a certainty. This wasn't a family dinner. It was a public execution, and I was the guest of honor. The days leading up to that Sunday dinner felt like a slow, deliberate tightening of a psychological vice. My family's treatment of me, which had once been a passive form of neglect, transformed into an active, almost gleeful campaign of condescension. It was as if my job loss wasn't a personal crisis to be met with empathy, but a long-awaited opportunity for them to finally and irrevocably establish their dominance. They were no longer just dismissive, they were cruel, and their cruelty was cloaked in the guise of well-intentioned advice and concern, which made it all the more insidious. The first full-scale assault came on Wednesday, the day after the dinner invitation. My father called, his tone infused with the booming, unearned authority he reserved for what he considered life lessons. "Evelyn," he began, forgoing any pleasantries, "your mother and I have been talking, and we think we have a solution for you. My golf buddy, Bob, his brother-in-law, runs a small IT company. Mostly just setting up computer systems for dentists' offices, that sort of thing. I told him about your situation, and he said he might have an opening for a technician. It wouldn't pay what you're used to, of course, but in your position, you can't be too proud." I stood in my kitchen, phone pressed to my ear, completely speechless. He wasn't just offering a suggestion, he was delivering an insult wrapped in a favor. I, who had designed and implemented multi-petabyte data architectures for a global corporation, was being offered a job fixing printer jams and resetting passwords. It was a calculated demotion, a way to reduce my entire career to something small and manageable, something that wouldn't overshadow Mark's new, inflated title. "Dad," I managed to say, my voice dangerously calm, "I appreciate you thinking of me, but I'm an enterprise-level software architect. That's a completely different field." His response was swift and dismissive. "Was, Evelyn? You was an architect. Now you're unemployed. This is the real world. Sometimes you have to take what you can get. Don't let your ego get in the way of a paycheck." The conversation ended there, leaving me shaking with a rage so profound it felt like a physical illness. He didn't see me. He saw a problem to be solved, a failure to be managed. The second incident, just as corrosive, came from my mother on Friday morning. She called with a chirpy, false brightness in her voice. "Evelyn, dear, since you have so much downtime now, I had a wonderful idea," she trilled. "You know how I've always wanted to organize the family photo albums? All those boxes in the attic? It would be the perfect project for you. It would keep your mind occupied, and it would be such a tremendous help to me." The request was staggering in its insensitivity. While I was frantically updating my portfolio, networking with industry contacts, and trying to chart the course for my entire professional future, she saw my life as a void to be filled with her tedious chores. She was reducing me to an unpaid personal assistant. "Mom," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice, "I am not on vacation. I am working full-time on finding a new position. It's a demanding process." Her laughter was like shattered glass. "Oh, don't be so dramatic, darling. How long can it possibly take to send a few emails? You'll have plenty of time. Just think of it as a way to contribute to the family while you're in between things." The phrase "in between things" hung in the air, a delicate, venomous euphemism for failure. As I had done my entire life, I capitulated, promising to look at it over the weekend. The familiar, bitter taste of resentment filled my mouth. I was 32 years old, a leader in my field, and I was still being treated like a sullen teenager who needed to be kept busy. But the most brazen and public humiliation came, predictably, from Mark. On Friday night, he posted a picture on Instagram. It wasn't just the picture itself, a carefully staged shot of his wrist, adorned with a gleaming new Tag Heuer watch, resting on the leather-wrapped steering wheel of the BMW I'd co-signed for. It was the caption. He wrote, "Success isn't a destination, it's a mindset. You get what you work for. Number hustle. Number level up. Number no excuses. Number CEO life. It was a direct, targeted missile. Every hashtag was a poisoned dart aimed at me. No excuses. He was publicly framing my layoff not as a corporate decision, but as a personal failing, a lack of his own supposed grit. He was leveraging my lowest professional moment to amplify his own fraudulent success, all while flaunting the very status symbol my financial sacrifice had afforded him. Within minutes, my phone buzzed. A text from an old college friend. "Hey, saw Mark's post. That's a choice. You doing okay?" The shame was a physical heat that spread across my chest. He hadn't just insulted me. He had announced my perceived failure to the world. I was on the verge of canceling, of texting some lame excuse about being sick. I couldn't face them. I couldn't endure another second of their condescension. On Saturday afternoon, desperate for a dose of sanity, I met my old mentor from Omnitech, David, for coffee. David, a grizzled, no-nonsense engineer in his late 50s, had seen it all. He listened patiently as I recounted the week's events, my voice cracking with a mixture of anger and hurt. I told him about the technician job, the photo albums, the Instagram post. When I finished, he didn't offer platitudes. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and serious, "this isn't about your job. It never was. You need to understand something. To them, your success was a threat. It was complex, it was intimidating, and it made Mark's mediocrity look even more stark in comparison. Your layoff isn't a tragedy for them. It's a relief. It brings you back down to a level they can understand and control. Their reaction isn't about you at all. It's about their own desperate need to maintain a narrative where they are in charge, and Mark is the star." His words hit me with the force of a physical blow, knocking the wind out of me but also clearing my head. He was right. I had been trying to understand their behavior through the lens of love and family, but that was the wrong framework. This was about power. "They don't see you, Evelyn," he said, his voice softening. "They see a resource, a safety net. And now that they think the net has a hole in it, they're lashing out. But they are making a colossal mistake." He took a sip of his coffee. "They have no idea who they're dealing with. Omnitech letting you go is the dumbest thing they've done in a decade, and the entire industry knows it." A tiny, defiant spark of hope ignited within me. He was reminding me of who I was outside of their suffocating orbit. On my way home from that coffee, fortified by David's validation, my mother called with one final instruction for the dinner. "Evelyn, just a little reminder to wear something nice tomorrow night," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. "We don't want you to look, down on your luck. It's a celebration after all. Try to make an effort." I clicked the phone off, my hand steady. Make an effort? Oh, I would make an effort. I was walking into that house as the designated failure, the cautionary tale, the lamb being led to the slaughter. What they failed to realize was that this lamb had been secretly sharpening her teeth, and she was about to show them what a real predator looked like. I walked through the front door of my parents' house on Sunday evening, feeling a strange, detached calm. I had chosen my armor carefully, a simple, elegant black dress, understated but professional. It was the kind of outfit I would have worn to a board meeting, a silent rejection of the down-on-her-luck persona they expected. I carried a bottle of decent Pinot Noir, a perfunctory gesture of peace in a war I was about to escalate. The house was already buzzing with a forced, brittle festivity. The air was thick with the scent of my mother's roast beef, Mark's favorite, and the faint, cloying smell of air freshener. Gold and silver balloons, a testament to their garish celebration of mediocrity, hovered near the ceiling. A crudely lettered "Congratulations" banner was strung above the fireplace, a monument to their delusion. I felt like an anthropologist observing a strange, alien tribe. Mark, the man of the hour, was holding court in the living room. He was wearing a shirt that was too tight and laughing too loudly at his own jokes, a half-empty glass of scotch in his hand. He greeted me not with a hug, but with a condescending pat on the shoulder. "Ev, glad you could make it," he boomed, his voice slurring slightly. "Good to see you getting out of the house. Gotta stay positive, right?" My parents hovered around him like satellites, their faces beaming with a pride that was both baffling and profoundly sad. I made myself as small as possible, finding a seat in the corner and nursing a glass of water. Nodding politely as distant aunts and uncles offered their awkward condolences about my situation before quickly pivoting to praise Mark's incredible success. The entire evening was a carefully orchestrated performance designed to highlight the contrast between their chosen son's ascent and my supposed descent. I felt their eyes on me, watching for any sign of weakness, any crack in my composure. I gave them nothing. The dinner itself was a trial by 1,000 paper cuts. Every dish was a favorite of Mark's. Every anecdote revolved around his childhood triumphs. My father recounted, for what must have been the 100th time, the story of Mark's business in high school selling candy bars at a markup. "Always had a head for business, that one," he concluded, beaming. They conveniently forgot that I had been the one who wrote the simple inventory tracking program for him on our ancient home computer, the tool that actually made his little enterprise profitable. My contributions, as always, were erased from the official family history. I endured it all with a placid expression, a silent observer at my own public shaming. But then, as the dessert plates were being cleared, came the moment that would incinerate the last remaining thread of my dutiful daughter persona. It was the last straw, delivered with the casual cruelty of a firing squad. My father, flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, stood up, tapping his glass with a knife for attention. The room quieted. "I'd like to make a toast," he announced, his voice reverberating with patriarchal authority. He raised his glass high. "To my son, Mark, a true go-getter. A man who understands that in this world, you either lead or you get left behind. Son, your mother and I are beyond proud." He beamed at Mark, who puffed out his chest and raised his own glass in a self-congratulatory salute. Then, my father's gaze swept across the table and landed on me, pinning me in place. His smile tightened, becoming something sharp and cruel. "And," he continued, his voice taking on a patronizing, instructive tone, a toast to Evelyn as well, "we hope this experience serves as a valuable lesson. It's a tough world out there. Success isn't handed to you on a silver platter. It reminds us all that nothing is guaranteed, and that sometimes a little humility is the most important lesson of all." The words hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was a perfectly executed assassination of my character. He hadn't just celebrated Mark, he had weaponized that celebration to publicly declare me a failure, a lesson, an object of pity. He had stripped me of my dignity in front of the very people whose opinions he had taught me to value above all others. I looked around the room. Mark was smirking into his champagne glass. My mother was studiously examining a loose thread on the tablecloth, a silent accomplice. The rest of the family shifted uncomfortably, their eyes darting away from mine. In that moment, something inside me didn't just snap, it turned to steel. The years of quiet hurt, of swallowing my resentment, of hoping for a crumb of recognition, it all burned away, leaving behind a cold, crystalline clarity. The love I had been chasing was a phantom. The approval I had craved was a cage. I was done. I was not their lesson. I was not their failure. And I was about to show them exactly what I was. Without a word, I calmly reached down to my purse under the table. My fingers found my phone, my thumbs swiping across the screen to open my messages. The room was still draped in a suffocating silence. I typed a single word to the one person who knew the truth, the one person who was waiting for my signal. Now, I pressed send. The message disappeared into the ether. They thought the toast was the grand finale of their little drama. They had no idea it was merely the opening act for mine. My secret weapon wasn't a single, brilliant trump card. It was a fortress, built brick by meticulous brick, over a decade of dedication, foresight, and a reputation my family had never bothered to comprehend. The story they had constructed for me, a narrative of a fragile, jobless daughter, spiraling into irrelevance, was a work of pure fiction. The reality of what had transpired since my layoff was a quiet, intense, and highly strategic campaign that they were completely oblivious to. The truth is, my departure from Omnitech wasn't an end, it was an emancipation. Within 24 hours of my elimination, my professional network, a web of connections I had carefully cultivated over years of collaboration and mutual respect, lit up. My LinkedIn inbox was flooded. My phone began to ring with calls, not of condolence, but of opportunity. Headhunters from Google, Apple, and Amazon all reached out. CTOs from rival firms I'd competed against for years sent discreet emails. Omnitech's loss is the industry's gain, one message from a well-respected CEO read. When you're ready to talk, we have a blank check waiting. They saw what my family couldn't. My value was independent of my employer. I was not a cog in a machine. I was the engineer who designed the machine. I politely and professionally deferred all of them, explaining that I was taking a brief period to reevaluate my long-term goals. I was playing a bigger game. The call I was truly waiting for came on a Friday evening, just as I was contemplating the bleak prospect of the upcoming family dinner. It was from Chloe, my fiercely loyal and brilliant former executive assistant at Omnitech, who had been laid off in the same sweep. "Evelyn," she said, her voice crackling with an energy I hadn't heard in weeks. "He's on the line. He wants to talk to you. Now." He was Alistair Finch, a venture capitalist who was less a man and more a myth in Silicon Valley. Finch had a legendary, almost supernatural ability to identify nascent genius and provide the capital and strategic guidance to forge it into a world-changing enterprise. To get a meeting with Alistair Finch was difficult. To receive an unsolicited call from him was unheard of. Our video call that Saturday morning was a masterclass in efficiency. Finch was a man in his late 60s with piercing blue eyes that seemed to analyze my very soul through the laptop screen. He didn't waste a second on small talk. "Miss Preston," he began, his voice a calm, authoritative baritone. "I have been following your work for 3 years. The AI platform you architected at Omnitech was, without exaggeration, 5 years ahead of its time. Their decision to shelve it in favor of chasing quarterly earnings is an act of corporate malpractice of the highest order." He paused, letting his words sink in. "I am not calling to hire you. That would be an insult to your talent. I am calling to back you. I want to build a new company from the ground up, with your vision at its core. My firm, Finch Ventures, will provide the capital, the legal framework, the operational support. You will provide the genius. You will be the founder and CEO. You will build the future that Omnitech was too foolish and too frightened to embrace." The offer was staggering, an alternate reality crashing into my bleak present. He wasn't just offering a job, he was offering a kingdom. $15 million in a Series A funding round, a controlling equity stake, complete autonomy. It wasn't a life raft to save me from drowning. It was a custom-built rocket ship with the keys in the ignition. While my family was busy whispering about my situation and offering me jobs fixing dentists' computers, I was on a red-eye flight to Palo Alto. The next 72 hours were a blur of meetings with Finch's formidable team of lawyers, financiers, and strategists. We hammered out the details, structured the company, and I signed the incorporation documents. I rehired Chloe on the spot, not as an assistant, but as my chief of staff and co-founder, giving her a slice of the equity she richly deserved. We poached 3 of the most brilliant, loyal engineers from my old team, who resigned from Omnitech without a moment's hesitation when they heard what I was building. We named the company Nexus Innovations, a nod to our mission of creating the central point where data, intelligence, and efficiency would converge. The plan was to operate in stealth mode for another 2 weeks, finalizing our product roadmap and preparing for a massive, coordinated media launch. The story was embargoed at all the major tech journals. But sitting at that dinner table, enduring that final, cruel toast from my father, I realized that my personal liberation couldn't wait for a corporate timeline. The narrative of my failure was being cemented in real time, and I had a moral obligation to myself to burn it to the ground. I needed to reclaim my own story, not in the pages of TechCrunch in 2 weeks, but right there, in that suffocating dining room right now. The now text I sent to Chloe was the activation of a contingency plan we had half-jokingly devised the day before. "What if your family gets really awful at this dinner?" she'd asked. "We need a break glass in case of emergency option." The plan was simple, elegant, and devastating. Chloe would wait precisely 10 minutes long enough for my text to seem unconnected to her arrival. She would then show up at the house, playing the part of the frantic, loyal chief of staff, in a panic over a supposed information leak. She would announce that one of the big tech journals had broken the embargo and published the story of our funding round early. She would claim she needed an official statement from me immediately for damage control. It would be a perfectly staged, undeniable third-party validation of a reality so far beyond their comprehension that it would shatter their world. It was a declaration of independence, disguised as a corporate crisis. The doorbell was about to ring, and it would toll not for me, but for them. Exactly 10 minutes after I pressed send, the doorbell chimed, a clear, sharp sound that sliced through the thick, self-congratulatory atmosphere of the dining room. The interruption was so abrupt, so out of place in their carefully managed celebration, that everyone froze. My mother frowned, a flicker of annoyance crossing her face. "Who on earth could that be at this hour?" she muttered, looking toward the hallway as if expecting an uninvited guest to be a personal affront. "I'll get it," I said, my voice cutting through the silence, calm and measured. I pushed my chair back from the table, the scrape of the legs against the hardwood floor sounding unnaturally loud. Every eye in the room followed me as I stood. "I'm expecting someone." The statement hung in the air, a small, intriguing mystery that planted the first seed of doubt in their smug certainty. They exchanged confused glances. "Evelyn? Expecting someone?" I walked to the front door, my steps feeling deliberate and powerful. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with a surging, righteous adrenaline. This was it. I opened the door to reveal Chloe, a portrait of professional urgency. She was flawless in her role, dressed in a sharp, dark gray business suit, her hair pulled back into a severe bun. She held a tablet clutched in one hand like a shield. Her face was a mask of controlled panic, her eyes wide with feigned alarm. "Evelyn?" she began, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry clearly into the dining room. "My sincerest apologies for interrupting your family dinner. I know you said not to be disturbed, but this is an emergency. It couldn't wait." My father, assuming his role as patriarch, was already halfway out of his seat, his expression a mixture of irritation and suspicion. "Whatever this is, young lady, it can wait until morning. We are in the middle of a private family celebration." Chloe didn't even glance at him. Her focus was entirely, respectfully, on me. "I'm afraid it can't, sir," she said, her tone firm but polite as she took a single authoritative step into the entryway. She held up the tablet, the screen glowing brightly, angled so that anyone looking from the dining room could see the bold, unmistakable logo of TechCrunch, the most influential news outlet in our industry. The embargo has been broken. The story just went live. The Nexus Innovations Series A round. The $15 million funding from Finch Ventures. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the room. It was heavier, more absolute, than any silence I had ever experienced. It was the sound of a reality collapsing. The clatter of Mark's fork as it slipped from his nerveless fingers and hit his plate was like a gunshot. My parents stared, their mouths slightly agape, their faces a canvas of utter bewilderment. My brother looked as if he had been physically struck, the smug smirk frozen and then melting off his face to be replaced by a pale, slack-jawed disbelief. Nexus. What? My father stammered, the first to break the spell. Funding? 15 million? What is this woman talking about? I turned slowly, deliberately, to face them. I let my gaze travel from my father's confused face, to my mother's shocked expression, and finally, to my brother's crumbling facade. The feeling was not triumph. It was a cold, clean surge of power. Nexus Innovations is my new company, Dad, I stated, my voice even and clear, resonating with an authority they had never heard from me before. Alistair Finch is my lead investor. I am the founder and CEO. Chloe, a masterful actress, delivered the next line with perfect timing, adding a layer of irrefutable legitimacy. The article also makes a point of mentioning that you turned down a multi-million-dollar counteroffer from Omnitech to stay, she said, her eyes briefly flicking towards my father before returning to me. They're quoting industry analysts who are calling you one of the most exciting and formidable new founders of the year. The color drained completely from Mark's face, leaving it a sickly, greenish white. 15 million? He whispered, the words barely audible. The sound was pathetic. His new title, Head of Client Strategy, which had seemed so grand just moments before, now sounded like a child's make-believe game. Now, it was my moment, the culmination of a lifetime of being underestimated. I looked directly at my father, whose face was a storm of conflicting emotions. You just gave a toast about humility, Dad. Let me tell you about humility. I was humble for the last 3 years, ever since I wrote you a check for $50,000 from my own savings to keep this roof over your head. A loan that was never mentioned again. I was humble when I co-signed the loan for Mark's BMW, putting my own financial future on the line so he could project an image he hadn't earned. My gaze shifted to my mother, who was now staring at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. You were worried about what to tell Aunt Susan. Well, Mom, you can call her tomorrow and tell her that your unemployed daughter just founded a company with a valuation that could buy and sell her entire neighborhood. I think she'll find that sufficiently impressive. Finally, my eyes locked onto Mark's. He was trying to shrink into his chair, to become invisible. And you? I said, my voice dropping, becoming quiet but sharp as a razor. You with your Instagram posts about hustle and no excuses. Let me tell you what real success looks like. It's not about flaunting a watch you can't afford or a car someone else is responsible for. It's about building something real, from nothing, on your own merit. It's about earning respect, not demanding it. They were utterly annihilated. There were no defenses, no counter-arguments. The carefully constructed narrative of their family, the one where Mark was the brilliant heir and I was the dependable but ultimately disappointing background character, had been publicly detonated. My mother opened her mouth, a desperate sputtering sound emerging. Evelyn, we didn't understand. No, I said, cutting her off. You didn't want to understand. It was easier for you to see me as a failure. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, a testament to their defeat. Then I turned back to Chloe, my tone shifting back to crisp professionalism. "Thank you for letting me know, Chloe. Let's step outside and draft a response. I'd like a statement ready within the hour." "Of course, Evelyn," she replied, her face a perfect mask of deference. We turned our backs on the wreckage of their celebration and walked towards the door. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. I could feel the heat of their shock and humiliation on my skin. As my hand touched the doorknob, I paused and spoke one last time, without turning around. "And thank you for dinner," I said, my voice cool and final. It was truly illuminating. Then we walked out into the cool night air, leaving them frozen in their seats, surrounded by the golden balloons and the cold, bitter ashes of their own making. As the door clicked shut behind me, the sound was not one of finality, but of a beginning. The cool night air felt like a baptism. The moment the front door clicked shut behind us, sealing my family inside with the ruins of their evening, it was as if a crushing physical weight had been lifted from my chest. Chloe and I walked down the stone pathway in silence. We didn't get into my car immediately. Instead, we stopped on the sidewalk under the amber glow of a street lamp. The adrenaline from the confrontation began to recede, leaving a strange, quiet hum in its place. "So," Chloe said, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her face, "how does it feel to be the CEO?" I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for a decade and finally, genuinely, laughed. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated release. "It feels," I said, "like I can finally breathe." We didn't go back to my empty apartment. We didn't go to an office. We went to a sleek, 24-hour cafe downtown, a place buzzing with the quiet energy of late-night coders and entrepreneurs. It felt like my new native habitat. Over steaming mugs of coffee that tasted like victory, we didn't just approve a press release. We planned a revolution. We mapped out our hiring strategy, our product milestones, and our market disruption tactics. The work was a balm, a welcome and familiar comfort that washed away the lingering residue of the evening's drama. For the first time, the work was entirely mine. The vision, the risk, the potential reward, it all belonged to me. The next few weeks were a controlled, chaotic blur. As predicted, the TechCrunch article sent a shockwave through the industry. My phone, which had been silent for weeks, became an incessant buzz of activity. But this time, the calls weren't condescending offers of technician jobs. They were congratulatory messages from former colleagues, interview requests from the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, and partnership inquiries from companies that, just a month ago, wouldn't have given me the time of day. We leased a stunning, light-filled office space in the heart of the city's tech district, a space with glass walls and skyline views that felt like a physical manifestation of my new, transparent, and limitless future. I spent my days in back-to-back meetings, not just interviewing the brightest engineers in the field, but inspiring them with a vision they were hungry to be a part of. The work was grueling, more demanding than anything I had ever done at Omnitech, but it was a joyful exhaustion. It was the satisfying ache of building something from the ground up. This newfound freedom permeated every corner of my life. I broke the lease on my sterile suburban apartment and moved into a modern penthouse condo downtown with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the city I now felt I was a part of, not just a spectator in. I filled it not with sensible, parent-approved furniture, but with art that moved me, books that challenged me, and a profound, wonderful silence gloriously free from the hum of unspoken judgment. Meanwhile, a different kind of storm was raging in the digital space my family occupied. My phone was a battlefield of their desperate, clumsy attempts to regain control. First came the barrage of angry, wounded texts from my father, accusing me of humiliating him and showing a complete lack of gratitude. They were followed by a series of long, rambling voicemails from my mother, oscillating between tearful pleas for me to explain and passive-aggressive comments about how I had always been so secretive. The most pathetic, however, were the attempts from Mark. He sent a LinkedIn connection request with a note. "Hey sis, huge congrats. We should totally connect and talk synergy." The sheer audacity of it was almost comical. He saw my success not as something I had earned, but as a new resource he could tap into. I ignored them all, not out of spite, but out of a deep, instinctual need for self-preservation. I had spent my entire life in their emotional gravity, and I needed to achieve escape velocity. I put their numbers on silent and archived their emails. I needed to build my new world without the architects of my old one trying to tear it down. I heard about the fallout through the family grapevine, from a cousin who called to offer her genuine, heartfelt congratulations. She told me Mark's promotion had been exposed as a lie. He'd been put on a performance improvement plan at work and was in danger of being fired. My father, in a desperate attempt to co-opt my success, had started bragging to his golf buddies about my daughter, the CEO, as if he had been the mastermind behind it all along. They were scrambling, trying to rewrite the narrative in which they had been the villains, but the ink was already dry. They thought an apology was a key that could unlock the door to my new life, not understanding that I had changed all the locks. I wasn't just moving out of their shadow, I was building an empire where their shadows couldn't reach. 10 months later, the city was painted in the vibrant hues of late autumn, and the world I inhabited bore no resemblance to the gray, suffocating landscape of the previous year. Nexus Innovations wasn't just a success. It was a phenomenon. The AI platform we launched, built on the very architecture Omnitech had discarded, had become the new industry standard. We had signed contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies. Our revenue had surpassed even Alistair Finch's most optimistic projections, and we were in the midst of a second, massively oversubscribed funding round that valued the company in the hundreds of millions. My face had been on the cover of Forbes magazine, a surreal experience that felt both validating and strangely distant. The woman staring back from the newsstand, confident, visionary. The tech prodigy who broke free felt like a truer version of myself than the dutiful daughter who had sat silently at that dinner table. My life was no longer about debugging code in a lonely cubicle. It was about leading board meetings, delivering keynote speeches at global tech conferences, and feeling the profound, electrifying joy of watching my own vision reshape an industry. My penthouse condo had transformed from an empty space into a true home, a sanctuary filled with the warmth of friendships, the buzz of intellectual debate, and a deep, grounding sense of peace. Justice, I discovered, is rarely a thunderous clap of divine retribution. More often, it's a slow, quiet, and inevitable unfolding of consequences. It's the natural result of the choices people make, the karmic bill that always comes due. For my family, the bill had been substantial. Mark's career, built on a foundation of bluster and my financial backing, had completely imploded. Without a successful sister to use as a prop or a financial safety net, his mediocrity was laid bare. He had been fired from his consulting job 3 months after our confrontation, unable to meet even the most basic performance metrics. The last I heard from my cousin, he was working in a commission-based sales job, driving not his repossessed BMW, but a modest sedan, his inflated ego finally punctured by the harsh reality of his own limitations. My father's attempts to ride my coattails had backfired spectacularly. His desperate name-dropping and attempts to present himself as my mentor in his social circles had become something of a running joke. He had tried to use my name to secure a spot in an exclusive angel investment club, only to be politely but firmly rebuffed after the club's director made a discreet call to me for verification. He and my mother were forced to confront a reality they had spent a lifetime avoiding. They had systematically undervalued and alienated the one person in their family who had actually built something of lasting worth. They had bet on the wrong horse, and their social standing, which they prized above all else, had suffered for it. They weren't the parents of a captain of industry. They were the estranged parents of a bona fide one. After 6 months of complete silence, I had decided to re-establish contact, but on a battlefield of my own choosing. There would be no more suffocating Sunday dinners in their home. Our interactions were now confined to brief, quarterly meetings at a quiet, neutral cafe downtown. The power dynamic was not just inverted, it was shattered. They were no longer the arbiters of my worth. They were petitioners, tentatively seeking a connection to a world I now controlled. The conversations were stilted and awkward. My mother would ask a flurry of superficial questions about my exciting life, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and regret. My father would awkwardly attempt to offer business advice, suggesting synergies and market opportunities with a vocabulary gleaned from watching cable news, his words sounding hollow and foolish in the face of my actual experience. They were desperate for a piece of my new life, not because they loved me, but because my success was a mirror reflecting their own failures. The final act of closure, the moment that officially severed the last transactional tie, came last month. I had instructed my personal accountant to prepare a document. At our scheduled coffee meeting, I slid a crisp, cream-colored envelope across the table to my father. His eyes lit up for a moment, perhaps expecting an invitation, a gift, an offering. Inside was not an invitation, but an invoice and a cashier's check. "What is this?" he asked, his voice trembling slightly as he pulled out the documents. The invoice was meticulously detailed. Repayment of a friendly family loan, dated the 14th of October, 3 years prior. Principal, $50,000. Interest, compounded annually at a conservative market rate of 5%. Total due, $57,880, $1.25. The check was made out to me from a trust I had established. It was for the exact amount of the co-signed car loan for Mark, a debt I had quietly paid off in full after the dealership had threatened collections. "I'm closing the books, Dad," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "I'm paying myself back for Mark's car, and I'm considering your debt to me officially forgiven. We're square." "This way," I added, looking him directly in the eye. "We can move forward without any old business hanging over our heads." The color drained from his face as he stared at the figures, the truth of the transaction finally hitting him. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a declaration. I was not a bank. I was not a resource. I was not their safety net. His hand trembled as he put the papers back in the envelope. For the first time in my life, I saw him not as a towering authority, but as a small, diminished man, trapped by his own pride and poor judgment. In that quiet cafe, surrounded by the murmur of strangers' conversations, I finally felt the last chain break. I had learned that true family isn't about the blood you share, but about the people who celebrate your light instead of trying to stand in it. I had found my true family in the brilliant, dedicated team at Nexus, in the unwavering support of friends like Chloe and David, and most importantly, within myself. As I stand now, in my office overlooking a city that glitters with possibility, I often reflect on the strange, painful, and ultimately liberating journey of the past year. It's a profound irony that getting fired, the moment I thought was my greatest failure, was in fact the single most empowering event of my life. It was the violent, necessary catalyst that forced me to confront a truth I had spent a lifetime avoiding. The foundation of my old life was built on a lie. The earthquake of my layoff didn't destroy me. It simply demolished the prison I had mistaken for a home, allowing me, for the first time, to build something true and lasting in its place. The greatest lesson I've learned is that my worth was never a commodity to be determined by a performance review, a job title, or the fickle approval of my family. It is an intrinsic, unchangeable part of who I am. For years, I had contorted myself, making myself smaller, quieter, and less threatening, all to fit into the cramped, suffocating box they had designed for me. The shock of being cast out forced me to realize that the box was the problem, not me. Their inability to see my value was a reflection of their own limitations, not mine. I've come to understand that real independence isn't just about financial security, as liberating as that island. It's about emotional sovereignty. It's the deep, unshakable knowledge that you are whole and complete on your own, that your sense of self does not require external validation to exist. It's the freedom to define your own success, to write your own story, and to choose who gets a starring role in it. So I want to ask you, have you ever had a moment in your life where a perceived failure turned out to be your greatest blessing in disguise? A door slammed shut in your face, only to reveal that you were standing at the entrance to a universe of possibilities you never knew existed. I would be honored to hear your stories of transformation in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, if it stirred something in your own journey of resilience, please give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges, and share it with anyone who might need a reminder that their value is not up for debate. And always remember, sometimes you have to lose a job to find your true calling, and sometimes you have to lose the family you were born into to finally find yourself. Thank you for listening.